From the ashes of a fallen empire, a new world was forged in fire and faith. For roughly 1,000 years, Europe was a crucible of chaos and creation, where barbarian warlords became kings, and a single church held the power to command armies. But don't picture 1,000 years of darkness and stagnation. This was a millennium of radical, violent, and world-altering change. The institutions, nations, and ideas that define our modern world weren't inevitable. They were born from the rubble of antiquity, in an era of nights, plagues, and suns. This is the story of how the medieval world was made. Our story begins with an ending, the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. For centuries, Rome had been the center of the world, a single power that connected the continent with roads, laws, and a common identity. But by the 5th century, that world was unraveling. The empire was buckling under its own weight, plagued by power struggles, a failing economy, and an overstretched military. The final straw, waves of mass migration, as groups like the Goths and Vandals crossed the borders, looking for land and safety. In 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor was quietly deposed. An era had ended, and the power vacuum that opened up plunged Europe into a new reality. What followed was fragmentation. Rome's centralized authority shattered into countless smaller pieces. In its place, a patchwork of Germanic kingdoms emerged, ruled by warrior elites. The Franks took Gaul, the Visigoths took Spain, and the Angles and Saxons began their journey to what would one day become England. These weren't states in our modern sense. They were realms held together by personal loyalty sworn to a king, those intricate trade networks that were the lifeblood of the Roman economy. They collapsed, cities shrank, and life became overwhelmingly local and rural. Literacy, once common for the Roman elite, became the rare possession of monks and priests. This period is often mislabeled the Dark Ages, and while things certainly got worse for a while, it was far from an age of nothing. It was an age of forging. Amidst the chaos, one institution not only survived but thrived, the Christian Church. While emperors vanished, bishops and priests remained. The Church became the single most important thread of continuity, preserving what was left of Roman administration and classical knowledge. Monasteries, spreading across the wild frontiers of Europe, became the guardians of learning. Monks painstakingly copied ancient manuscripts from the Bible to the works of Roman and Greek thinkers, saving a legacy that would have otherwise been lost. This new Europe was a fusion of three things: the warrior traditions of the Germanic peoples, the enduring legacy of Rome, and the unifying power of Christianity. You can see this fusion in figures like Clovis I, king of the Franks. His conversion to Christianity around 496 AD was a brilliant political move. By aligning with the Church, he won over the Gallo-Roman population and gained the backing of the most powerful spiritual authority on the continent. This forged a bond between sword and cross that would define the medieval world. Out of this fragmented landscape, one man rose to impose a new order on Western Europe. His name was Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. A man of relentless energy and military genius, he took the throne of the Franks in 768 and, over 3 decades of campaigning, did what no one had done since the Romans. He united a vast swath of the continent. His Carolingian empire stretched from modern-day France and Germany into Italy and Spain. But Charlemagne wasn't just a conqueror. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III placed a crown on his head in Rome and proclaimed him Emperor of the Romans. The act was seismic. It announced that the glory of Rome was reborn, but this time, its power was sanctified by the Church. Charlemagne's reign sparked a cultural revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance, where he promoted education and tried to create a coherent legal code to govern his diverse territories. For a brief, shining moment, a centralized European order seemed to have returned. However, the unity Charlemagne built was fragile, held together mostly by the force of his own personality. After he died in 814, His empire was torn apart by his grandsons, culminating in the Treaty of Verdun in 843. This treaty split the realm into 3 parts, laying the groundwork for the future kingdoms of France and Germany. Just as the empire was breaking apart from within, Europe was hit by a new wave of threats. From the north came the Vikings, terrorizing coastlines in their longships. From the east, Magyar horsemen launched devastating raids. From the south, Saracen pirates stalked the Mediterranean. Kings were often powerless to protect their scattered lands. In this new age of insecurity, power flowed away from the king and into the hands of local strongmen. This need for local protection gave rise to one of the defining systems of the Middle Ages, a system we now call feudalism. So what was it? At its core, feudalism was a pragmatic solution to instability, structuring society around the exchange of land for military service. A king would grant a piece of land a fief to a powerful noble, his vassal. In return, the vassal swore loyalty and pledged to fight for him. That great lord might then grant parts of his land to lesser knights, who became his vassals. This political structure was built on an economic engine called the manorial system. The manor was a self-sufficient agricultural estate controlled by a lord and worked by peasants. Most of these peasants were serfs, people bound to the land. They owed their lord labor and a portion of their harvest in exchange for a place to live and, most importantly, protection. This created a rigid social order. Those who fought, the nobility; those who prayed, the clergy; and those who worked, the peasantry. It was a local, defensive, and hierarchical world born from the need to survive. After centuries of fragmentation and defense, the tide began to turn. The period from roughly 1000 to 1300 AD, the High Middle Ages, was an era of resurgence and explosive growth. The Viking raids had stopped, bringing new stability. A warming climate and new farming techniques, like the heavy plough and 3-field crop rotation, led to a massive increase in food production. For the first time in centuries, Europe's population boomed. This newfound security fueled dynamic change. Towns and cities began to grow again. A new middle class of merchants and artisans emerged, their wealth based on commerce, not land. Trade routes reopened across the continent, with Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa becoming maritime powerhouses. It wasn't just about trade, either. Europe's mind was waking up. The 12th century saw a renaissance in learning as contact with the Islamic world reintroduced long-lost works of Greek philosophy and science. This intellectual ferment led to a brand new institution, the university. Places like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford became centers of intense debate, where thinkers like Thomas Aquinas worked to synthesize Christian faith with Aristotelian logic. This was also an age of incredible religious fervor, with the Catholic Church reaching the height of its power. This spiritual confidence manifested into dramatic ways, in stone and in steel. Across Europe, the monumental, earthbound Romanesque style of architecture gave way to the soaring heights of the Gothic. Cathedrals like Notre Dame stretched towards the heavens, their stained glass windows flooding the interiors with divine light. That same aggressive faith also turned outward in the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II called on the Knights of Christendom to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. While only the First Crusade was truly successful in its initial goal, the impact on Europe was profound. The Crusades expanded Europe's horizons, stimulated trade, and reinforced the idea of a unified Christendom. This was the era of the chivalric knight and powerful kings, exemplified by events like the Norman conquest of England in 1066, which created one of Europe's strongest monarchies. The explosive growth of the High Middle Ages couldn't last forever. The 14th and 15th centuries were a time of profound crisis, a series of cataclysms that would shatter the medieval world and pave the way for the modern one. First, the climate changed. The Little Ice Age brought colder winters and ruined harvests, leading to the Great Famine. Millions starved, but that was just a prelude. In 1347, trading ships brought an unseen passenger from the Black Sea, the plague. The Black Death swept across Europe with horrifying speed. Within 5 years, it killed at least a third of the population, and in some places, closer to half. The social impact was immense. With so many dead, the old feudal order began to crack. Labor shortages empowered surviving peasants, who could now demand higher wages and greater freedoms. The centuries-old bonds of serfdom started to dissolve, fatally weakening the manorial system. As if plague and famine weren't enough, this was also an age of constant war. The 100 Years' War, a struggle between England and France from 1337 to 1453, transformed warfare itself. At battles like Agincourt, English longbowmen devastated the ranks of heavily armored French knights. Later, cannons made stone castles obsolete. The era of the chivalric knight was ending, replaced by professional, paid armies loyal to a king. Even the universal authority of the Church was shaken. First, the popes moved to Avignon, France, falling under the influence of the French crown. Then came the Great Schism, a bizarre period where 2, and later 3, rival popes all claimed to be the real one, throwing Christendom into chaos. These crises sparked calls for reform from figures like John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, planting the seeds of the Protestant Reformation. By the 1400s, Europe was a transformed continent. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked a symbolic end to the old Roman world. Power was now consolidating in the hands of powerful kings. Society was more mobile, and the old certainties were gone. The story of the Middle Ages is vast, filled with incredible moments and unforgettable characters. If you want to explore more of it with us, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the past. From the ashes of Rome, a new civilization was born. Over 1,000 years, Europe was completely reshaped. It began with a struggle for survival, creating a decentralized feudal order. It rose to a crescendo in the High Middle Ages, an era of booming cities and soaring cathedrals. And it was finally broken and reforged in the crises of the late Middle Ages, where plague and war tore down the old structures. The Europe that emerged on the cusp of the 1500s was fundamentally different. Feudal territories were becoming centralized nation-states. A new merchant class was challenging the old nobility. The universal authority of the Church was fractured, and new ideas were spreading, helped by the invention of the printing press. The Middle Ages weren't 1,000 years of darkness. They were the crucible in which the modern world was forged. The political, religious, and social DNA of our own time was written in this epic and transformative era.